of nature, winning a huge victory in Florida. It's extraordinary. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. She's the executive director of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights and the program manager for the CDER's International Center for the Rights of Nature, Center for Environmental Rights.org, FOR. Center for Environmental Rights.org is the website. The Twitter handle is Rights of Nature. And Mary, excuse me, I think I mispronounced your name. Or is it Mari? Welcome back to the program. And please correct me on how to say your name. Oh, Mari, I am sorry. I forgot to push the magic button to put you on the air. There you go. You're on the air.
Thank you, Tom.
Hey, so tell us about this victory down in Florida.
It was a big victory on election night. The people of Orange County, Florida, voted by almost 90% to recognize the legal rights of rivers and other waterways in the county. And it's the first rights of nature law anywhere in the state of Florida, and with over 1.4 million people, the county is now the largest place in the United States with a rights of nature law in place. So a big deal for Florida and a big deal, of course, for rivers there.
In the abstract, this sounds great. What does it mean?
It means that we're seeing a really fundamental shift occurring in places like Florida. As you may know, and your listeners may know, Florida has seen just the red tides in the Gulf. They've seen algae blooms across rivers and other waterways. They've seen destruction of the Everglades. So water is everything in Florida, and the devastation that occurs because of industrial human activity has just made things worse and worse and worse. And people on the ground are just tired of waiting for their state government, the federal government, to save them, and have finally decided it's time to take this action ourselves. And so the people of Orange County are the first to go forward to say we're going to make a really fundamental shift in how we govern ourselves toward nature and, in fact, how we treat nature itself under the law by recognizing that nature has even the most basic right to exist. And in Orange County now, rivers not only have the right to exist, they have the right to flow, to be protected against pollution, and to maintain a healthy ecosystem.
So historically, the way that most of what you described, Mari, in terms of the red tide and all these other things, were in the context of the harm that is done to human beings by having a polluted environment or a destroyed environment. And up until recently, we've always dealt with that by saying that people have the right to have fresh water. People have the right to breathe clean air, and therefore we're going to regulate the so-called right of polluters to pollute and things like that, and developers to develop. Coming at it from the point of view of nature has a right is a very, very different thing. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between those two approaches, both legally, perhaps even constitutionally? Because when the republic was founded, there was no consideration for the environment. It seemed limitless, and so it doesn't appear in our Constitution or anywhere else in our founding documents. Legally, constitutionally, and also practically?
There is a growing recognition that our human right to a healthy environment, or in this case, our human right to clean water, it doesn't have a lot of beneath it if water itself doesn't have the right to be healthy. So the Orange County law and what we see in rights of nature laws in local across the United States, within Ecuador's constitution, which was the first to constitutionally enshrine legal rights of nature, or Pachamama, the Orange County law in Florida contains both the rights of waterways, but also the human right to clean water. Putting those two things together, recognizing that we are dependent on these ecosystems to provide this clean water, but they can't do that unless they have the highest form of legal protection, which is the recognition of legal rights. So it's a marrying of those two ideas together within the law, but also, I think, as you say, like within our culture, a recognition that we should have a human right to a healthy environment, but we don't have that in a meaningful way, even though it's in certain statutes, certain state constitutions. Here you have it underfed. It's protected because the right of water itself is being protected here in Orange County. And it's much like we saw in other places. So we've done a lot of work in India to recognize rights of the Ganges River, Mother Ganga, as they call it. And the campaign says that Ganga's rights are our rights, meaning we are the water is us. That concept that we need to protect both rights to ensure both are protected.
So if the water has a right and the water can't speak or write legislation or vote, then there has to be some intermediary who is expressing that right. And I'm guessing that the guy who owns the coal mine upstream from you on the river is perfectly willing to speak on behalf of the river, as are you. I mean, how does that play out?
It's much like when we think about like a child who has certain rights but is unable to express them and represent themselves in court. They need to have a guardian or somebody who can essentially stand in the shoes of the child to represent the child's interests, the child's rights. And so we're seeing there's something very similar with nature. You're right. You know, a river can't literally speak in a court of law, but somebody can stand in the shoes of that river to represent the river's rights itself, not the right of the person speaking on its behalf, but the right of the river itself or other ecosystem. And of course, we've seen this play out in places like Ecuador, where they've had their constitution in place for over a decade. You have people going into court in the name of an ecosystem or in a species to represent the interests of that species, to defend and enforce their rights. And it's playing out much like it does, like under child negligence statutes here in the U.S. So we have parallels in the law. When somebody is unable to speak for themselves, somebody can do so on their behalf, and it's much the same for nature.
I guess where I'm trying to get to with this is if what we're doing is basically the same thing as an attorney ad litem, you know, the attorney who represents a child's interest in court. If the river is going to have somebody like that, and because this is a very new area of law, we have not yet seen an assault in the context of the rights of nature. We've seen people saying, oh, there is no right of nature, but not, hey, I represent the right of nature and I disagree with you on how nature wants to be represented. What happens when one attorney says, I'm here to represent the rights of nature, and that river doesn't really care if it has 0.3% arsenic in it? It doesn't matter. It's not a big deal to that river. The river still flows just fine, thank you very much. And then the other lawyer says, no, I'm here to represent the rights of the river, and the river does worry about all that arsenic.
Well, these laws are recognizing very specific rights of an ecosystem or species or nature on the whole. So a right to flow, a right not to be polluted, and those things are being defined in the laws. And, of course, this question of can nature have rights, that question has now been answered because we have nations that have said, yes, nature has rights, and these are the rights that they have. And so there's no longer a question of can it happen. The question now is how do we actually innovate the law to ensure it is and that we fulfill those legal rights, the promise of those rights that these laws hold. So in places like Orange County, you have the people who voted for this with over, 89% of the vote saying, you know what? The rivers have a right to flow. They have a right not to be polluted, as defined already within Florida statute. They have a right to maintain a healthy ecosystem. And much like with other legal rights, often it does rely on the courts to ultimately help us interpret what is the full extent of those rights. And I think we'll, of course, see something similar here with the rights of nature. We've seen this before in the law. It happens as the body of legal rights gets expanded from time to time. So it's much the same with rights of nature.
Margil, the Executive Director of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights and the Program Manager of CDER's International Center for the Rights of Nature. Center for FOR, environmentalrights.org is the website. Rights of Nature, the Twitter handle. Mari,